Hello and welcome to your monthly pilot briefing. Normally we put these out on the Flying Reporter Members Club, but there's some news today that I think will be of interest to pilots across the board. And so just as a little gift to the community, we're going to put this out publicly for everyone to see. And then if you like it, you can come and join us on the Members Club to get these bulletins every month. Today we have some news from the CAA about its attitude to cardiovascular risk, the dreaded stress ECG test that many over 50 are being sent on. It's meaning that lots of pilots are going down the PMD route, the pilot medical declaration route, rather than maintain their class 2. It's been very controversial, and there's some changes from the CAA that have been announced today. We're going to be talking about the CAA's attitude to restricted airspace and maybe pose the question, are they giving out restricted airspace all too easily? And we're going to discuss a tragic spin accident, an accident where an aircraft got into an unrecoverable, or a spin that they didn't recover from, should I say, that unfortunately led to the death of a very young private pilot. As always, I'm joined by flight instructor and examiner Matt Lane from the Astral Aviation Consulting pilot workshops. Hi Matt, how you doing?
Yeah, good to see you, John. Been following your progress across the world, really, eagerly. So it's great to speak to you and catch up in person. So
Yeah, well, I'm in Indiana today in the hotel room, and probably doing a bit more flying later this week. So let's see where we get to this week. So Matt, I woke up about an hour ago because the time zones are different. I know it's middle of the day for you there, and I opened my emails as I tend to do, and there was a little gift in my inbox from the CAA because I'd prepared for this pilot briefing and we discussed what we were going to talk about, and then they dropped a big story on us at the last minute. But being the ever resilient journalist that I am, in my pajamas I started studying, making calls, doing research, and got to the bottom of it. And it all concerns pilot class 2, or in fact even class 1 medicals as well, class 1 and class 2 medicals, and also affects air traffic controllers, although that's not going to be the subject of how we're going to approach this today. We're going to look at it from the pilot perspective. And this is where lots of pilots around my age, and possibly yours as well, you're probably a bit younger than me, Matt, are finding that getting into a tricky spot with their medicals, where they're getting to an age where the AMEs have been deciding through a scoring system that they're at greater risk of a cardiovascular event, a heart attack or a stroke. And then they're sent off for expensive tests and analysis with a cardiologist. They have to do these stress ECGs. You've probably all heard about it. And it's led to a lot of people going down the pilot medical declaration route, which is great that we have that, but it does restrict the kind of flying you can do. And there's been a whole load of concern, hasn't there, Matt, about this is sort of taking pilots out of a system where you're being monitored by a specialist doctor every year or two to a pilot medical declaration that some might say could be open to abuse, or people, signing that they're fit when they're not, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of removing oversight if people are going down that route for these reasons. I mean, Matt, what's been the whole issue around it? What's been at the nub of this problem?
So some of the concern has been that the AMEs use a Q-RISK tool. You can look at this online. It's all open source. If you just Google Q-RISK tool, it will come up and you can put it there. And it's a little model, kind of spreadsheet based, where you put in all sorts of variables like your height, weight, blood pressure, cholesterol scores, whether you smoked, whether you're on hypertensive medications and things like that. So various things. And it gives you a score, which is a percentage outcome. And that's a kind of percentage about a cardiac event in relation to the general population. You can have a look at it. You can have a play around with it. The concern has come that some of the thresholds were being applied a little bit more strictly, so that if you hit 10%, you would be sent down the exercise ECG route. Now, the way the tool works, if you're kind of in your 60s and on hypertensive medication, which a lot of people are by that stage, regardless of how fit they are or what other health conditions, the algorithms in the tool could drive you to this 10% fairly easily, or very close to it. So the concern was that it was being quite a blunt tool, and that with quite strict applications of this 10% for class 2 holders, that it was driving a lot of people to have exercise ECGs. And there was a bit of a feeling from the industry that maybe it was a little bit too enthusiastic in sending people to exercise ECG. So the industry very much lobbied to say, can we have a look at this in relation to the risk? And, are we being proportional enough with what we're making the population do for medicals? And that's what the CAA have done with this work that's come out.
Yeah, I mean, they've been very quiet about it, that all the representative bodies have been banging the drum. I think AMEs have even been sort of raising issues and questions with the CAA over it, and we were kind of eagerly anticipating what the CAA would do. And about a few weeks ago, they put out a little notice which basically just teased us, saying, well, we're going to do something, guys, so prepare. And I think a lot of us were kind of thinking, oh, no, what are they going to do? Is it going to be in our favour, or is it going to make things worse? And anyway, the results are out. They've published their guidance today, and there is some good news, because this Q-RISK score that you mentioned, this 10%, which, to be honest, if you sort of get to your 60s, like you say, just by nature of your age and maybe just a slight bit of something else going on in your health, you could tip over into this threshold, past this threshold. They're now increasing that threshold from 10% for Class 2 medicals to 15%. So that does make it slightly more proportionate. It kind of takes account, I think, perhaps of the real risk of a private pilot having a heart attack or a stroke at the controls of their aircraft, because, the aviation bodies are saying, these things are so incredibly rare, and I think, even when they do happen, the risk to people on the ground is hasn't been proven, and the bodies have been saying, look, let's have a more proportionate approach to this. So yeah, they're increasing this threshold to 15%, which should make it easier for private pilots on a Class 2 medical to keep their medicals for longer. This Q-RISK score, I mean, I was talking to an AME this morning about it, and they were saying, look, this Q-RISK wasn't designed for this purpose. This wasn't what it was set out to do. It's not designed to set out your fitness to fly. But they say there isn't much else that they've got to work on. So this is the best tool that they've got that's around at the moment. We've got to accept that. And extending this to 15 seems to make sense. Now, there are some other changes which, depending on your point of view, may be a good or a bad thing. So whereas at the moment, I think you wouldn't be subjected to this sort of risk assessment unless you had, say, diabetes or HIV or hypertension as an example. If you didn't fall into those brackets before now, you wouldn't be subjected to these risk assessments. Now they're going to apply it to all pilots. So, no matter what your medical background, you will be subjected to this risk assessment. Another thing that is now clear in this guidance that wasn't there before is that once you've gone down this road, you've been sent off to a cardiologist to do an exercise ECG or a stress ECG or another test, they now say, that given you the time frame by which time you have to be retested or re-examined or reassessed. Now, before it was, I think, sort of left a little bit vague, and some AMEs thought it was 3 years, some thought it was 2 years. For an exercise ECG, I think they're now saying it's 2 years, and then you've got to be re-examined again. For some of the other tests, if you've had them, it's 3 years. The guidance is on the CAA website. It came out on the Skywise, so you can go and read all about that. I think I think most people will see this as good news, actually, Matt. I mean, one thing to consider is this doesn't get all pilots off the hook forever and ever. My AME said to me this morning, once you get to 65, it starts getting because of your age, it's going to be really difficult for you to keep your Class 2 without having to undergo some of this screening and some of this testing. That is still there, but I suppose it's bringing that age a bit further into the grass, as opposed to some of us at 50 finding ourselves. I mean, I was 9 on the score, Matt. I'm 53. I was 9 on the score 2 years ago. I'm now 7. I've lost a lot of weight. My diabetes has been reversed. So lots of things have worked in my favour. But yeah, I think good news, Matt. Don't you agree? Does that sound like a sensible way forward?
On the face of it, reading through, what this does is it gives AMEs in the system a wider suite of options to prove your fitness, which I think is a positive thing. So, having scanned it and not read it in detail, not being clinically trained, it would appear that basically what they're trying to say is if you have more detailed, more credible tests, the frequency at which you will have to have investigations is longer. Whereas if you have some of the more low-level tests, you might have to have them more frequently. So it may be that a pilot, hits a certain age or has a certain health problem. They're going to have some quite detailed, very up-to-date, technologically capable tests that give the CA a lot of information, and the CA can then, or through using the flow charts, your AME can go, actually, I've got enough information to say, yeah, you're good for another 5-6 years, I think, with some of the real high-level tests. So I think it is all going to come down to you're going to have to really discuss with your AME what works for you, what you're prepared to pay for, what kind of flying you think you're going to be doing. So I think that relationship and discussion with your AME and your cardiologist, if you need one, will be key. And figuring out individual pathways are the best way to demonstrate your fitness for certification.
I think the more pilots that are on Class 2 medicals, the better. Just for the general health of pilots. If you're declaring on a pilot medical declaration, hypertension, there is no symptom. There's no obvious symptom to it. You need to know whether you've got, high blood pressure. Diabetes, again, you might not know. You might not know that you're in the danger area, and then you face all sorts of complications.
Yeah. And I mean, absolutely, John. I hate my medical every year. Who doesn't? But I moan about it, and my wife gives me quite short shrift, to be honest, because her view is, well, it's good. I get you checked over in a decent fashion once a year, and it makes you, look at these things and these health factors. So, that's probably the right attitude to have, really.
Great. Okay. Well, share your comments in the comment section if you've got any views on it. As I say, this has literally just come out, so Matt and I have really just had an opportunity to have a quick read of it. There may be other things, the devil's in the detail, as they say, and there's quite a bit of detail there, and you almost need to be medically qualified to understand it all. But as I say, I did speak to an AME today, and I think I've distilled the key changes that are going to be relevant to you. Next, restricted airspace, Matt. And I've been away flying in the States, and this has kind of passed me by a bit, but I think there's been a bit of controversy over some restricted airspace that was introduced in the southeast of England. Can you tell me about that and why it's been so controversial?
So between the 4th and the 13th of June, there's a temporary RAT, restricted area temporary, and that's enforced around Lasham, and it's the Sailplane Grand Prix. Now, what this temporary RAT is a 3 nautical mile radius restricted area, and it's from 800 feet to 5,500 feet AMSL, active daily from 10 to 1500 UTC. So this is a very, very large, busy event with lots of gliders and tug aircraft conducting mass launches, holding passions and races around like that. So the CAA have taken the decision to put this restricted airspace in to protect this event at the Lasham area. Now, any restricted airspace is always controversial because what it does is effectively it closes that airspace to other airspace users, really. And, there's some concerns that, why is the Class G airspace being closed for a gliding competition? We don't have, have lots of competitions all over the summer. And, concern, pilots are always concerned about precedent. If restricted airspace gets awarded for one thing, what else could it get awarded for? So those are some of the concerns that have been expressed by pilots. Not everybody, I should add. Yeah,
and I think what makes this one particularly irritating for pilots is that, the southeast is hugely congested anyway. this area is a busy GA flying area. You've got Popham to the north, you've got Farnborough, Blackbush, Fair Oaks to the east. You've got it's if you look at the chart, I mean, I'm showing it on the screen now. If you look at it, it's effectively blocking off that east-west route for pilots that don't want to go through Southampton, that don't want to go through Farnborough. And it only leaves a little gap outside of controlled airspace of about 2 miles. And even then, that bit of airspace is showing as having intense gliding activity in it, so you probably wouldn't want to go in it anyway. So pilots will be forced to either avoid it altogether and just not fly if they're going east-west, or go through Southampton and Farnborough. And I think that's what that's why this has been so irritating for people. Also, the length of time that it's active for. And I think some people have said, haven't they, why can't they hold this competition somewhere quiet? Why does it have to be in this really busy area? And then, I suppose there's the argument, isn't there, that, why shouldn't they hold a gliding competition? They're airspace users just like us. Powered pilots, have their restricted airspace for their air races, for, flying displays or whatever it be. And so it is interesting, and I suppose also, Matt, and you can understand why it's in place. If they're running an activity with 40 gliders on tugs, trying to keep it airborne over there, you would want to avoid it, wouldn't you? I mean, even if it were just a NOTAM and not not restricted airspace, I think I'd be avoiding it for sure, because it's going to be dangerous to you. I think it's to try and fly yourself into that area.
Yeah, and this is some of the counter arguments are that this is not usual activity for Lasham. I mean, everybody knows Lasham's very busy gliders, but this is a especially busy, concentrated period, and that's the sort of the counter argument as to why this activity deserves its own restricted airspace.
Does it pose a question of, how the CAA determines whether to grant restricted airspace or not? I mean, we're familiar to see it used, when there's an emergency, or, when you've got emergency helicopters or whatever going on over an incident. We see it used for, royal events or royal things, or, big national state occasions, for big sporting events like Epsom, or one of the horse racing things, or air displays and things like that. But for GA to have its own restricted airspace for its own activities, does it? Do we know how the CAA determines what is legitimate and what is not? Do we know that?
Well, what the CAA should do is look at holistic risk assessment. So, if there's airspace and an activity going on it, they should look at all of the users and the frequency and the type of activity going on in that airspace, and then they should make a holistic risk assessment as what is the best way of protecting the safety of all of the airspace users that may need to access that airspace. And that's what should happen, because we have to recognize when you put in any kind of restricted airspace and restrict its use to one particular or a particular type of user, what you then do is disperse the activity of the other users to other areas. So you may create choke points and hazards elsewhere. So any risk assessment has to take into account the holistic risk picture, and that's a bit of a word salad, I know, but you should look at everybody involved and say, right, what is the best decision, the best design that keeps everybody safe? That's what should happen.
Yeah, I think, and it's got to be proportionate. I mean, having a 10-mile radius wrap for a gliding competition that's only using 2 miles of it doesn't make sense. I'm not saying that that's what they've done here, but it's about being proportionate, and also the time that it's active for should only be the minimum necessary to provide the mitigation, the risk avoidance for the event. And I've flown a little bit with the air races, and they have, and I know some people have said, why should the air racers have rats? Well, having flown in an air race, I can tell you it's jolly well needed, because we're screaming around the sky at 500 feet at full throttle, and with exemptions from the rules of the air for overtaking and low flying in some cases, I think. So and in those cases, they're only active for, say, 45 minutes, so just for the race itself, and then it stops, and then it comes back on again for the next race. So they're very carefully timed to beat the minimum possible disruption. I think with this one, with it being over sort of 6 hours, 4 hours, over the course of several, nearly 2 weeks, is it, or something? I mean, that's quite a lot. And I think that's the other thing that's got people irked as well. But what do you think? I mean, I don't think we should be sort of. I'm a powered pilot, and I don't want glider pilots having rats or vice versa. I don't think we're all airspace users, and we should all be mindful of each other's activities and needs. So I don't think that comes into it here. But I mean, are you concerned about how rats are being put in place? We get quite hot under the collar, don't we, about drones? That's a big one. And I think perhaps there is some legitimacy around that discussion. But yeah, and also this like flexible use airspace, Matt. This is something we're going to have to get used to, where restrictions or airspace can be turned on or off when need applies, and they've been testing kind of ADS-B beacons, haven't they, to indicate when activity is active and not. And that certainly would improve how proportionate these restrictions are, but at the same time it does add an extra layer of complexity, doesn't it? Because can you actually plan a flight? I couldn't plan a flight through there, could I really, if I took off and didn't know if in the next 10 minutes it's going to become active or not? So
no, absolutely. And I think technology will have an increasing part to play in this. I think we've all got to share the airspace that we use, especially the lower airspace, and that's the uncrewed, the fixed wing, the gliders, rotary. Everybody's got to share that airspace, and I think the intent is there but I think in the execution from all the users, there's still a little bit of a way to go to. Everybody's got to sort of meet each other halfway, as it were. So if you've got some restricted airspace, but then you don't need it or don't use it, well, let's get it deactivated. If you've provided contact details for people to coordinate with you, and that you need to answer the phone and be able to give that information. Equally, if you're a fixed wing or rotary operator, you might have to accept a little bit of a rerouting or a bit of disruption if it helps segregate you from some other important activity. So I think it's all about sharing the airspace that we've got to best use.
Yeah, and I think in this case, I would say I would like to think that the CAA and the event organisers had conversations with Farnborough and Southampton around. I can imagine both of those units would say, well, it's got nothing to do with us, guys. I'm not going to put on any extra staff to help you here. But you'd like to think there would be a joined up approach to this, so that Farnborough may be more forgiving or more helpful or more, and may offer. I'm not saying that Farnborough doesn't give transit. I've never been refused a transit through Farnborough, for example. Likewise with Southampton. But you'd like to think that they might be warned to expect some pilots who wouldn't ordinarily call up for a transit, and perhaps be slightly more helpful than they might otherwise be. These are two busy units, and quite often you can call them up, and it can be a bit frustrating sometimes when you've got a pilot who isn't used to talking to ATC confidently, and they're trying to get a transit. You can see that sort of situation coming in a place like in a situation like this, and you'd hope that both those units would be mindful that they may have a little bit more work on their hands during the course of these events. But interesting stuff. If you're flying in that area, check your NOTAMs. Speak to Farnborough. This airspace, I think, even though it's notified as being active all that time, I think it may go cold at certain times, and so talking to Farnborough may get you through that. That is one of the conditions of entry. You can get a clearance from Farnborough. And keep a lookout if you're anywhere in that area, because it's going to be busy with gliders. So our final topic today is a very sad story about a really young aerobatic pilot who just, I think, got their aerobatic rating. And it was a Cessna 150. It was a spin accident. They died, unfortunately. Matt, what happened here? This was in Yorkshire, I think.
It was, yeah, and there's a Cessna 150 Aerobat. You can find the AIB report online. And it was conducting an aerobatic training flight when it entered the spin quite normally, quite safely, but the aircraft did not recover from the spin, and unfortunately they impacted the ground. They had lots of evidence from onboard video in this case, which is sometimes unusual in these accidents. But so the AIB investigation were, ultimately the pilot correctly applied the opposite rudder in the spin recovery, but did not move the elevator sufficiently forward to unstall the wings. So the aircraft remained in a developed spin, which was why they hit the ground tragically.
And I think also, in that, dare I say, panic, or that very stressful situation that they were in when they didn't come out of the spin immediately or when they expected to, they then, I think, relieved forward pressure on the elevator and pulled it back closer to neutral. And I think there were times when rudder application was reduced or changed. And I think, in the operating handbooks, it says that it can take one or two sustained turns before you have to expect that it could take some time to come out of the spin. So you've got to keep those control inputs in longer than you might think.
That's right. So I think in this case the investigation found that, like I say, the pilot, his plan was to carry out a spin and then recover using the techniques that he'd been trained upon. But unfortunately, he didn't carry out the technique quite correctly. Like I say, they didn't move the elevator sufficiently forward to carry out an effective spin recovery. And then when the aircraft didn't start responding to the spin recovery, like I say, there was lots of sort of varied inputs and things like that, none of which sadly were effective or were ever going to be effective. And they didn't recover.
I think we all as pilots can picture that scene, and it would be absolutely terrifying. It sends chills down your spine, doesn't it, when you think about it and what that poor lad was going through. Spinning is not part of the syllabus for the PPL. It would be done in an aerobatic training. Mm-hmm. You can go and do upset recovery, can't you? And I guess you've done that, Matt. I guess you do it quite a lot. But
yeah, it's in my RAF reserve role, we spin and spin train and check other pilots doing spinning very frequently. So yeah.
Is there one standard recovery for spinning? Given that many of us watching this will not
follow the flight manual handbook recommended recovery actions for your particular aircraft. There can be quite differences. The Grob 115 that I fly, you move the control column to the neutral position in elevator terms. In lots of other aircraft, you need to continue moving the elevator forward until the spin stops, which could be a significant way forward as well. There even is some outlier aircraft where some of the recommended techniques the control column all the way rearwards, believe it or not, although some of those aircraft have also got a CA supplement saying to move forward as well. So the point is you need to be familiar with whatever the flight manual or pilot's operating handbook says for your particular type that you're flying.
I'm just trying to think now whether I know my aircraft is placarded as having no spin, not permitting spins, but would the handbook have in it a spin recovery technique?
It will do for an arrow, yeah.
Yeah, and so I need to refresh my my memory on that. And is there? I'm sure you're going to say yes to this. Is there value in undergoing that kind of training? Given that, yeah.
Well, there's differing schools of thought on this. So the historic school of thought was that you should experience spins and you should experience recovering from them. So should you inadvertently spin, that you can recover from them. The more modern thinking is that we actually teach stall spin avoidance. So we teach to recognize and recover the situation before you ever get into a spin situation. And that, I think that's important, because if you stall and spin at low altitude, it doesn't matter whether you're going to apply the correct recovery or not, you're not going to have the time to do it. So the modern training mentality is to teach to avoid getting anywhere near the spin. And historically, there was a lot of accidents in spinning training as well. So there was a view that the risk in training wasn't worth the overall benefit to the community.
There was quite a bit of talk in the AAIB report into this accident around parachutes, because I think the airframe manual stated that parachutes should be worn for this. But there's no legal basis for that. Or apparently, I don't think it's not regulation that for this kind of activity you would need to have a parachute. And in any effect, I mean, this pilot, I think, entered the spin at 5,500 feet or something thereabouts. He descended, I think, at about 5,000 feet per minute. So there was 60 seconds. You wouldn't get out of the aeroplane even if you had a parachute in that situation, would you? I mean, by the time you've realised that you're not coming out of the spin, it would be way too late.
Well, this is, and again, different schools of thought on this. Some schools, and certainly in the military, are very clear that you don't do spin or aerobatics unless you have a parachute. But to do that, the other school of thought is that, well, if you're going to carry parachutes, you've got to have an aircraft type that allows you to exit the aircraft in a suitable fashion with a parachute on. I mean, a Cessna 150 Aerobat has probably got jettisonable doors, but how easy is it going to be able to get in and out of the thing, like you say, in a hurry with a parachute on your back as well? And if you're going to use parachutes, you need training and competence in actually using them. It's no use, just picking up a parachute from the flying club, storeroom every time you go flying if you don't actually know how to operate it and look after it. So those are the difference. I mean, of course, the gliding community fly parachutes all the time, but then they know how to look after them, they know how to train with them, they know how they operate as well. So it's, again, I think it's something that needs to be quite particular to your particular operation and your overall operating procedures, I would suggest.
The other, I suppose, takeaway for all of us from this is sort of the training, the competence, the skill that you have, because I think this pilot was fairly newly qualified as an aerobatic rated pilot. He was described as highly competent. I think they were training to become a professional pilot, or they were studying for that. They got their multi-engine piston rating. They were highly dedicated to flying. They were flying a lot, but they still didn't recover adequately. So does this raise any questions for our training, or for what we do once we've got our rating and how we use it? Newly qualified with whatever it is that we're doing, do we need to be overly cautious? What could have prevented this from happening, I suppose, is the real question, Matt.
Well, I mean, we maybe never know the answer to that, because we weren't there in the cockpit. But surprise and startle effect can defeat even well-trained and competent pilots. So in a training environment, it's very much, you've got an instructor next to you, you're briefed, you're mentally prepared for what's going to happen. You've already kind of preset it in your head as to the actions you're going to do. So there's a degree of preconditioning and a degree of preparation, which is why the actions we carry out would often be effective. I think what happened to this poor pilot was that, they've been trained and competent, but what they thought was and expected was going to happen didn't happen. And at that stage, the surprise and startle sets in. And then, very quickly, especially if you're not hugely competent, you've not long past your training, that's when system overload, human overload sets in, and it's very difficult to overcome that. So in any competence, anything you've been trained in, you need to build your capabilities post training in a controlled manner. Keep reading the books, keep seek some mentorship, keep practicing the techniques you've been trained, and all that good stuff is the best way to guard against this.
And a jolly good briefing beforehand, so that you are refreshed on whatever recoveries or actions you need to take. And fascinating.
Yeah. So, for example,
yeah.
if we're in my operation in the military, if we're going to be going spinning, what we do at the end of the pre-takeoff brief at the threshold is we actually physically practice the spin entry maneuver control inputs, and we just on the ground practice the spin recovery control inputs as well. And that just assures you can do it and have a quick look to make sure you really are instinctively getting ailerons neutral when you look at the wind, and you are meeting the neutral point and things like that. So it's little things like that you can do to really build up that muscle memory, so that when something happens for real, you've done that preconditioning.
Matt, thanks for that and your thoughts on all of those issues. Thank you for watching this as well. This is usually a members club benefit, these pilot briefings every month. As I say, we've shared it publicly today because of the big news around that cardiovascular risk assessment guidance that's just come out. If you want to see these briefings monthly and get them in your inbox, then do sign up for the members club and make sure you're on the correct tier to receive these monthly briefings. Matt, I'll see you next month. Thanks for coming along today.
Yeah, delighted, and best of luck with the rest of your endeavours. We shall all be watching from afar with interest, John.
Yeah, I've got here. I've got to get back now, so that's the next challenge.
See you hopefully in the same aeroplane that you flew over it. So
that would be nice, wouldn't it? Until next time, bye bye for now. Thank you.